Hello, this is Melissa. It is Real History, and today is the 7th of August, 2025, and I am here with Nick Hayes from Hayes Reviews. You should check out his YouTube channel, and then he's got a listing there of all of his channels, ways to contact him, the different projects that he is involved in, and ways that you can support him. And I'm going to just say hello to you, and I think that you have something to share with the class.
What do I have to share? I think I might have shared it before.
Well, we haven't spoken together since
Oh,
the
we haven't.
arrival.
You're
It
right.
was
Yeah.
imminent.
It was,
So,
yeah. So we did Snow Crash
yes,
and then
and
everything changed.
that's
Yeah. So,
right.
yeah, earlier last month, a good few weeks ago now, my son was born and life has been full of joy and wonderment and happiness and poo and burps. Since then, it's been amazing. Yeah, it's one of the things I realized that I've been thinking about since then, because it just puts everything out into perspective. Everything is changed. Um, but the thing we keep saying, and this is my wife and I, we keep looking at each other. One, we keep looking at each other, going, how did we manage to do something as amazing as this? When we look at our son, it's like we did that, you know? That's just crazy. Um, and then the other thing is that the sensation is like the love I feel for my son. It's like both ancient and eternal. And that's the only way I can describe it. It's like he's always been with us and part of us, part of our family. It's a very strange thing to put into words, but yes, he's healthy. He's doing well. People with very good hearing might be able to hear him in the other room if he gets hungry or grumpy or anything, because the mic does pick that up occasionally. But yes, that is it. It all went smoothly. It all went according to plan, and the amount of joy that he has brought into the world already. I lost count of the number of countries where people were sending me congratulatory messages from. It's amazing,
Oh,
this era, this time we live in, that people as far flung as um, well, everywhere, all the continents were in touch, and I have friends all over the world, and just to think that he brought that much joy to these different countries and places and all these different people. It's quite a phenomenal, profound thing. So yes, that
oh,
is my announcement, and it's wonderful indeed.
well, that's really nice. I like to hear that. Well, you've seemed happy, and you've sent some of the cutest, sweetest pictures to me it just cheers me up when I look at them. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, we are talking about C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, and the first novel there is Out of the Silent Planet. And this was written in 1938. There are two more. I am about a third of the way through Perelandra. And then there is that hideous strength to come. I didn't look up I don't remember the year that Perelandra was written. It might also have been 1938, but that hideous strength was 1945. So this was right before World War II. And I think that is just an interesting perspective of what's not in there. That, it's right at that time frame when there's so much going on in the world. And yet, because what you might call badness or bentness, bent is a word that he uses in here, you might call it evil, is something that's always been with us, it would seem, that comes through here. So I enjoyed it. And as usual, Nick and I haven't, settled on a strategy. We're just going to wing it, I think they say, which is a good thing to do when you're going to space. So do you have any thoughts on where to start, or should I prattle on for a bit?
Um, Nothing specific. I'll just say that the inside of my book tells me the publication years. So we had, yeah, 1938. was this one. And then the second one was 1943,
Okay.
and then 1945 for the third one. So I hadn't really been thinking very much about the time it was written and the era around what was going on. But if you have any, I'd love to hear some of that context, maybe a little bit about the man himself, because I, with having my hands full, I haven't managed to do too much by way of sort of extracurricular reading to prepare for this.
Okay, well, I am going to just share a couple of random things. I did a little bit of, I read a couple of extra things, and but then most of my supplementary education came from listening to different podcasters or different people hold forth on what they thought about this or C.S. Lewis in general. And I had a kind of an interesting, I got lost in some little tiny aspect of C.S. Lewis's life that became fascinating to me. So I'll touch on that. But the first thing I'll say is again, this is the Space Trilogy. And there are some, hold on a second here, the Space Trilogy. I see, I don't know how to get rid of these notifications here. Okay, let's see if that did it. I was listening to someone talk about space, and space, of course, is a key concept in the Space Trilogy. But they were saying it is better to think of this as the Heaven or Heavens trilogy rather than space. And so before I come back to that thought, I'll just give a little bit of a background on C.S. Lewis. And I think it is important that I make this disclaimer. I am not in any way, shape, or form a C.S. Lewis scholar. I have read a couple of his books in my life, and that is it. And many of you listening are going to know more about C.S. Lewis and the things that he's written by far than I do. So that is my disclaimer here. But
You just reminded me as well. Sorry, just to
eh,
interrupt, but when I was looking up images of book covers and things to throw over to you for illustrative purposes when you edit this before you put it up, I noticed that some of the editions are actually called the Cosmic Trilogy. So it
oh,
actually does have a different names, and then apparently it's also known as the Ransom Trilogy sometimes as well. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that.
no, that is interesting. I hadn't come across that. So C.S. Lewis was an Englishman, and he was born in 1898, and he went to World War One. And those are kind of key things just in his background. I'm going to actually just pop up the page here that I have and tell us a little bit about his mother and father. He was born to, he was actually born in Ireland before the partition. There you go. I didn't realize that. I just learned that. So his father was a solicitor, and that is what we would call an attorney or a lawyer. And he had gone to Ireland from Wales, and his mother was the daughter of a Church of Ireland priest. And she was also the great granddaughter of a bishop, Hugh Hamilton, and John Staples. And John Staples was an Irish member of Parliament. So she wasn't altogether unconnected, and I think that's kind of all we need to know there. But C.S. Lewis went to World War One. He had in his teen kind of formative years, he was raised as probably many people of his time were as a Christian, and there was no question about it. You're a Christian, we believe in God, and we go to church on Sunday. But in his intellectual studies prior to university, he had decided for himself that God didn't exist and he was an atheist. And he had gone about it in a rather systematic approach, but that's the state of mind that he was. And I don't recall, like I said, I don't know that much about him, but let's just say that he would have been, maybe 14, 15, 16 during that time that he is coming to have that point of view. He then went to World War I, so he would still be relatively young because he was born in 1898. And nothing about, he didn't have one of those foxhole conversions. Yeah. So he went into World War I, fought, and came home an atheist. So that did not change his point of view. So it was only at university and as a young man that he began to very slowly have what you would call a conversion experience. It wasn't overnight, it wasn't dramatic, it was just a series of conversations with friends, explorations, and rethinking it. Now, I think that it is important that I know and you know that he is a Christian because this really is a Christian trilogy. There is Christian mythology within it, and it's definitely in no way over the head. It does not hit you over the head. It's quite subtle. And I think that you could safely say that you could read the entire trilogy. Well, I don't know because I'm only a third of the way through the second one and I haven't done the third. But so far, you could read it and have no idea whatsoever that this was a Christian writing from a Christian point of view. The other little tidbits from his youth, I think that C.S. Lewis's relationship with women is interesting, and who knows, it might become more pertinent as we go through the series. But he was extremely close to his mother, and she died of cancer when he was 9. And he kept kind of from that process so that as a child he didn't really know what was happening. And I think that his mother was probably strong and brave and still tried to do mothering things. And he wasn't allowed at the deathbed, so he didn't have any closure. It was, she was there, albeit sickly, and then she was gone.
Wow.
And that this was very devastating to him at the age of 9. Then he went to World War I and he met someone named Edward Moore. And Edward Moore was his buddy, his contemporary soldier in the war, and he was known as Paddy. And Paddy and he made a pact, possibly in the foxhole. They said, hey, we might not get out of here alive, but if one of us does, let's agree that we will always, for the rest of our lives, take care of the family of the one who doesn't make it out. And as it turned out, Paddy did not make it through the war. He died in 1918, I believe. So Paddy's father was already deceased, I think, and C.S. Lewis is, oh, the thing about C.S. Lewis, his name is Clive Stapleton Lewis, but I found him more endearing as a historical person when I learned that he was called Jack through his life, and I named one of my cats Jack. I like that name. So Jack Lewis, he had a father and Patty had a mother. So that was the arrangement. And there were siblings there that would have need to be cared for. So C.S. Lewis came out of the war now with a burden, and that was to take care of Patty's family, which was, I don't know how many siblings he had, but he had a mother, Janie Moore, and siblings. He did take care of them financially, and he actually lived with Janie Moore. And there was great speculation that they were uh, in a relationship, that they were actually lovers, that he called her mother. And you might think that, well, if they were in a relationship, that was certainly the public face of it. But wherever he went, she went with the family as well until she died in the 1940s. And one of the biographers said, well, I know there's been this speculation, but I've looked at things, and you're kind of left with a 50-50 feeling that it was just a familial relationship and he was carrying out that pact, or they had a relationship. But that same biographer started reading the letters of Patty's sister, Maureen, I think was her name, so the daughter. And the daughter made it pretty unequivocally clear that there was a romantic relationship between Janie and C.S. Lewis. So, really, up until his 40s, that was the significant relationship. So, certainly, there would be something to be said for she was a kind of a mother replacement for him. But it was also said that when he came into her life, she was 45 and still handsome. So she was still a good-looking woman, and but anyway, that we can leave it at that. The third significant female in his life was someone that he met, I think, in 1948. And I didn't pull up her name, but I believe it is Joy Davidson. And Joy Davidson was a Jewish American woman who had some children, and I think she was married, but separated, unhappily married. And she was in the UK. I wonder if I can even pull this up and see if we can find a little bit more because I don't remember. But his memoir that he wrote was called Surprised by Joy. And this was in part because of her, but also just the phenomenon of feeling joy. So it said in 1956, Lewis married the American writer Joy Davidman. That was her name, Davidman. And she died of cancer 4 years later at the age of 45. And he died about 7 years later of kidney failure at the age of 64. Now, Joy, according to her, I saw a YouTube of her son talking, and it would appear by the things that he said that he was a Christian, that he practiced Christianity. And he described a very warm relationship between his mother and C.S. Lewis, and also very much felt that even in that short time that they were together, that C.S. Lewis had been his father and, was a important father figure to him. But Joy evidently was an extremely intelligent woman who was very well read. And this is her son talking about her knowledge, but he said it would be doubtful that even amongst his peers that he had met someone as broadly read as his mother. Because, he would be in at Oxford and then later Cambridge with people who had their field of specialty, but Joy Davidman was read, widely read across the board. And so they had an intellectual engagement. But for reasons that I can't recall now, she was in England and needed a visa. She needed permanent residence. And he agreed to marry her in order to have her fulfill that need, but fell in love with her after they were married. And then he was a widower 4 years later. So there's a great deal of unusual circumstances around his relationships with women and also a great deal of tragedy. And like I said, I don't really know if it means that much, but there's one other element that I'll inject here having to do with a woman. This is I said I stumbled down a strange uh, avenue of exploration, and this one tied me up for a few days, and I still don't know that much about it, but it occupied me, and that is what is called the kind of the it's a famous debate that C.S. Lewis had with a philosopher by the name of Elizabeth Anscombe, Anscombe, and it is called the Lewis Anscombe debate. And Here's one other key thing that we can have in mind in discussing this novel is that C.S. Lewis had a problem with naturalism. My understanding of the way that C.S. Lewis had this antagonistic relationship with naturalism per se was that it had actively sought to remove anything supernatural from it. So one did not describe, at least this is my understanding, one did not describe themselves as a naturalist at that time in history if they believed in a creator. That naturalism kind of was maybe even a way we would say material. Was there even a bit of scientism being mingled in with that? I don't know. But speaking of scientism, my understanding is that when we get to that hideous strength, then we are going to come upon a lot of different concepts that we would think of as, kind of scientocracy, or, as Alan would say, scientists are the new priesthood. So those kinds of issues, but we're not there yet. And the Lewis Anscombe debate, I'm not even sure if it's worth mentioning at this point. It's such a tiny little niggling thing. The reason why I got fascinated by it is because I heard a couple of people say, C.S. Lewis wrote Christian apologetics until he had this debate with Elizabeth Anscombe, and she beat him in the debate, and it humiliated him. He was embarrassed publicly and humiliated, and he determined at that point that he would never write Christian apologetics again. Now, I heard that from the mouth of a key biographer of his, whose name has slipped my head, but he's more or less contemporary. He's on the go right now. And I heard him lecturing, and it was very interesting, and he said that. However, the deeper I dug into it, the more I realized that the whole debate and the debate around the debate is it's a field of study in and of itself. And all kinds of people from academia have weighed in on this with their thoughts, and including not just their thoughts, but a lot of historical documents and references to say, no, that's not the case. So you can find it on both sides. But I heard one person saying, "Oh, I've read the letters of Elizabeth Anscombe, and she herself was mystified that there was any hint of a rumor or an idea that C.S. Lewis fell away from apologetics, or that he was in any way humiliated or anything, and that they'd actually had dinner together later and they had mutual friends. And, to her, it was just a bizarre, manufactured debate about the debate. But it comes down to this, if I can find it here. So she was a young woman. She was in her 20s at the time of the debate, but evidently she was quite smart. She was eventually did become Catholic, and I'm not sure. I think she was raised that, but she was confirmed. So, in other words, she was confirmed in the faith within a few years of this debate. So, in the book Miracles, Lewis had argued that belief in reason's validity, so reason, so belief in reason's validity does not square with the belief that human thought, or belief itself, was the result of non-rational causes. So try to let that sink in. So belief, it doesn't square that reason's validity does not square with the belief that human thought, or belief itself, was the result of non-rational causes. Anscombe believed that Lewis had confused belief with grounds for belief, and also that Lewis had confused irrational and non-rational causes. In her words, I am going to argue that your whole thesis is specious because of the ambiguity of the words why, because, and explanation. And so she said she was reading the lives of the English Catholic martyrs, and she came upon this statement: anything that comes about must have a cause. And she thought that it needed a good proof. And so she tasked herself with finding an adequate one. And years later, she had come up with several, but none of them satisfied her. So, what ultimately came out, as far as I can piece together, was that rather than him turning away from Christian apologetics or having some major fallout or public humiliation, he took her criticisms to heart, and he actually reworked his entire thesis and argument to clarify the words that she thought needed clarification, and also additional words and concepts that she pointed out, like ground and cause, not being the same. So he strove for more clarity of language because of her approach during that debate. Again, I don't know if it's fascinating but or interesting to people, but I do think that women played a significant part in the both the formation of his intellectual life and also his emotional life in a way that was possibly different for a young man who just falls in love and gets married and goes about his life. That was kind of rambling. I don't know if it got us anywhere,
It's very
but
interesting, definitely. And the debate, wouldn't it be great if we just had a recording of it and we could listen to it and make our own minds up? But interesting that there's been a sort of hoo-ha around that and
huge.
what happened, and it just ties in really nicely to this theme of scientism, which is pretty important in the trilogy itself. I was just thinking as well, one of our early conversations was about Brave New World, which came out 5 or 6 years before the first book in the Space Trilogy. So this idea of scientism and where it would lead and what the antidote to it would be was clearly hot in people's minds. But it's not often you get. I think Space Trilogy stands out in that it's kind of it's not going along with that view of the world. It's not going along with that agenda. As you mentioned, he's writing from a Christian point of view, and it's refreshing to not be just reading something that is a dystopian hellhole that that is painted as an inevitable thing that is just going to happen whether you like it or not. That was one of my big things that I wanted to say about this book, was it how wholesome it was and how just a real change of pace from we've read Zamyatin, we did Brave New Worlds, Snow Crash, Animal Farm. There's a sort of thread and theme that goes to all of those, which is kind of the dystopia, I would say, or the ideology behind the dystopia. In the case of Animal Farm, the totalitarian effect on people and societies. So this was a real departure, and it has a very different feeling and theme. And I think that contextual information about his debate, my conspiratorial mind is thinking, I wonder if these rumors were spread that he was totally defeated and he abandoned his faith is just to prop up reason and scientism and say, look, it dissuaded this infamous Christian apologetist. Is that? I don't know what the
Apologist.
apologist. That's it. I was thinking apologetics, apologist. Yeah, it dissuaded this famous apologist of his faith, and
Mhm.
it reminds me actually of bring it to sort of contemporary. We've got a Jay Dyer who does a lot of apologetics on his YouTube channel, and he'll have on atheists and Muslims and Catholics, and he argues from an Orthodox Christian point of view. And I haven't listened to the where he speaks with other theists. I don't listen to those, but where he speaks with atheists, he does tend to make them look and sound kind of stupid. I don't know if that's just his style of debating. I don't know, but certainly I found those exchanges very interesting and entertaining, and his arguments for the existence of God. Um, Very compelling, and it sounds like they might be similar to the kind of discussions that C.S. Lewis was having with Elizabeth Anscombe. This sort of how does how does logic and belief and reason, how does that manifest out of the just space dust?
Hmm.
You know, how does inert matter organize itself into complex life, which is capable of rational thought, just spontaneously and through mutation? It, you know,
Hmm.
so what's the famous saying is kind of is it Terence McKenna? You know, atheism. It's like give me one miracle and I'll give you the rest. I don't know if I'm getting that wrong. I don't even know if I'm attributing that to the right person. But the idea is that oh, just give me the Big Bang. You know, the fact that nothing spontaneously exploded into everything. And if you give me that one miracle, I can explain the rest. So they're very interesting lines of discussion and inquiry for sure. And I think I would just wish that a recording or a transcript of that debate was available.
Well, it may well be. I just didn't find it. That was the very frustrating thing was it took me probably a full day of looking, here and there, not like I ever have a full day for something, but I found people talking about it, writing about it, but I want to see it. I want to hear it. I don't want you, I don't, And then I finally did find somebody who, a couple of people who sort of laid out. One was a mathematician, a Christian mathematician who was, on a rambling thing about math, but he kind of finally got to the point where he had a grid that he showed, a slide, and the grid had all of the points of the debate, which so you could at least see it out there and see the words there. But it was interesting. But I mean, like I said, I haven't read. I read. I think that my mother read to me when I was young. Chronicles of Narnia. I have a vague recollection of that, but I was quite young. I know she read us The Hobbit and The Wind in the Willows. And, I mean, I can remember specific texts, but I was too young to retain them. So I can't tell you anything about Chronicles of Narnia. I know they've made, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe has been turned into, a movie. I mean, so, and people love them. Lots of people remember reading them as children. I didn't. I've read um that what's that one where he's debating the devil is trying to tempt him. I can't even
That's
remember.
the screw tape
Screw
letters.
tape letters, yeah. And I actually didn't read that one that long ago, but that's actually quite good and very entertaining and a super quick read. And that's just basically how evil, if you will, let's just call it evil, how it works through just get to you just when you think, oh, but I'm good. Then that's your chink. And I started to read Mere Christianity actually earlier this year on recommendation, and then I got sidetracked. So I think that's basically the sum of it. Like I said, so many of you will know so much more about his body of work, but he was good friends with Tolkien. I'm very good friends from Oxford. And there's a couple other things, and this definitely the sort of philology work that C.S. Lewis did comes into play in this book. And then I also learned reading about him that his field of expertise was 16th century English literature. So and I read that the actual construct for the Space Trilogy came from his medievalist work. So it's got a medievalist framework. So the heavens are seen and discussed in medievalist terms,
Hmm.
and his some of the specifics about what was space like, what is heaven like, came from John Milton, who he would have been quite expert in because that was his field of study. So again, with the Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia, those are aimed at a younger audience, and I think that from what I have read, the Christian references are quite clear there. And like I said, you could get through this. It could never occur to you that there was anything here that was Christian. But if you stop and think about it, just his name, Ransom. Um, so, the word ransom, and we can talk a little bit about the storyline and you can tell people what happens to Ransom. But, you know, ransom makes me think about a sacrifice that might have to be made to save something. His school buddy, the fictional character, is Devine with an E, and then Weston is another kind of the scientist there. So you think of Devine and Weston as the industrialist and the scientist. And I listened to a couple of podcasters, and if I am able to find them again, I'll share that with you. But they were pointing out that C.S. Lewis really would have taken for his ideas and inspiration the two biggest sci-fi writers of the time, and that would be H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. And this was actually a fascinating, for me, discussion. And because it was that the fellow who was talking said, with H.G. Wells, what you get is that kind of sci-fi that you were just describing as going dystopian. And you're going to have that with H.G. Wells because of who he was, a Fabian socialist who thinks there's too many of us, man is the enemy. It would just there would be no war. We could have peace except you've got, you're the problem. And um, it was said that C.S. Lewis liked H.G. Wells and appreciated his science fiction, but the uh, distinction that this podcaster was making, who I think himself was a medievalist, interest and a philologist, interestingly enough, but he was saying that H.G. Wells gave a fantastical vision of the future, even the mechanism for going someplace was uh, imaginative. Whereas Jules Verne prided himself on making sure that his writing and his world and the way that you would reach other worlds was based on technology and scientific fact of the time, just moved out a little bit. So we're almost there. We can almost do that. This is conceivable. So Verne liked to write things that were really grounded in what was possible. And the other thing that this podcaster pointed out, which I never ever would have picked up on because I have not read H.G. Wells' The First Man in the Moon, but he said there's so much of this out of the silent planet that comes from H.G. Wells, the First Man on the Moon. And what you've got here, he also pointed out, he said, when C.S. Lewis is writing about H.G. Wells, and he's got those addendum at the end of the novel, those letters and everything, he said, we are to assume as the reader, because this is how C.S. Lewis intended us to, that it's not a fictional H.G. Wells with fictional ideas, that they're seeing him ransom and divine and everything. All of this is real. It's not that was his device, was that all of these creations of H.G. Wells are real.
Do
All
you
right.
see in your copy as well? Do you have a preface, just a little paragraph there by C.S. Lewis before chapter one? I've got a little preface. It's about 5 lines long.
Yes, it's called a note. Certain Slighting references to earlier stories of this type, which will be found in the following pages, have been put there for purely dramatic purposes. The author would be sorry if any reader supposed he was too stupid to have enjoyed Mr. H.G. Wells's fantasies or too ungrateful to acknowledge his debt to them. And then at the very end, in the afterword or whatever he calls it here, um, postscript. It says being extracts from a letter written by the original Dr. Ransom to the author. So supposedly Ransom wrote a letter to C.S. Lewis, the fictional character. And so that was an interesting way to close it. But yes, he definitely had a debt which he um, paid to C.S. to sorry, H.G. Wells.
I thought it was funny how he had, because I read that the first time I read it, I didn't think much of it, but when I reread it just earlier, I thought he's having a little dig, isn't he? He's saying, I hope people don't think I'm too stupid to enjoy Hershey. Well, like, is it too stupid to enjoy or stupid?
I mean,
Like,
yeah, go ahead.
how did you read that?
Well, that is how I read it initially. And then I thought about it further. And then I went
Too
back and,
stupid to have enjoyed. The implication is that if you do enjoy H.G. Wells, then you're stupid, right?
yeah. So, yeah, I, I don't know. But, but people have weighed in and said, no, he appreciated the work of H.G. Wells. But the interesting thing is that whatever his personal feeling towards H.G. Wells, clearly C.S. Lewis is not a scientific materialist. He is not somebody who, and there are some points I marked out here. He's not writing about for the greater good. He is not, the end does not justify the means for C.S. Lewis. He's very, um, I guess you could call it Christian in his perspective, where every individual matters a great deal. So,
Yeah, and I think that's kind of included in the what might be the sort of climax of this first novel. Um, there's a discussion on exactly that, and we get an insight into the mindset of the antagonist, and he just lays it all out and explains it all at this sort of key meeting later in the story, and they do talk specifically about that. And I think what we kind of realize is this book is it's a lot more about, rather than being about the plot and the adventure and the rip roaring kind of page turning shenanigans that the main character gets stuck in. It's more philosophical. It's more about the ideas and the concepts because it's quite short and a
mhm,
lot happens in it, and it does feel a little. It's not paced particularly. I don't think it feels like there's a lot crammed in and a lot to be said in quite a short piece of writing.
mhm,
Um, but it's quite deep, and I think he's got little subtle phrases and little the words that he puts in the mouth of Weston and Devine that reveal their worldview and are act as a kind of critique of this scientific materialist worldview. And just a note on the names as well. I looked into ransom because on the face of it, it's something you pay, isn't it, to get someone back? But it had an earlier meaning, and it was linked to redemption,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
meaning to buy back, to
mhm,
redeem, and that was so that fits perfectly into the sort of Christian. Uh, what would you say? The Christian worldview, I suppose, the redemption of man. And it's interesting because he is a sacrifice, isn't he?
mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of how he gets caught up into all of this. He is literally a sacrifice, and so for him to go on this journey, and he experiences quite a transformation as well, which I think is it was very heartwarming. Part of the wholesomeness of the story is this. There's a moment where he says, I had grown up." And because when we meet him, he's kind of this wandering vagabond, just walking
Hmm.
around, pleasing
Hmm.
himself, going where he likes to go. Seems not a bad person, but kind of a loner, just doing what he wants to do. And then he certainly the experiences of the journey cause him to develop and grow up and become more, I would say, more developed
Hmm.
as a Hnau, which we'll have to
No.
explain what that means later on.
Well, if we want to, or if this is a good time, we could actually give some of the names of the planets and the beings that he meets on the planet. So, not that we expect you to retain them all, and but hopefully some of you actually read along with us, and so you'll know what we're talking about. But do you want to do some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
All right.
I'll go for the beings because they're very memorable, and I think
Do we want to say what, just really briefly, do you want to tell everybody what happened before they left uh Volcandra? It's
yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, of course. So, and this is very interesting. The whole setup, which I think is the first two chapters or something. It doesn't take long for the adventure to begin. But Ransom is on a walking holiday. He's between terms. He's a lecturer, philologist. He's a doctor. His first name is Elwyn, Elwyn Ransom. And actually, I was trying to make I was trying to make anagrams of the Elwyn Ransom, to see because I noticed that Ransom is an anagram of Mason with an extra R, and I was thinking, I wonder if there's anything to that, and then I thought Elwyn Ransom, and you can actually get the word alien out of that, but then the rest of the letters don't really make anything, so I don't think there's any deliberate encoding in the name Elwyn Ransom that I can figure out anyway. Um, but Elwyn Ransom, he's on a walking holiday, and he gets caught in some rain and he's trying to find a place to stay for the night and he's not having any luck. And he comes across a house and he knocks on the door and she says, the woman who lives there, "Oh, you can try. There's nowhere around here, but there's a house up there. You could give that a go." It belongs to one gentleman. And it turns out that she has, I think, a son who
Mhm.
works there. And she says, "If you do go up there, tell my son to come home. He's a bit simple and he might need a bit of a prompt to get out of there because if they don't let him go, he'll stay there all night. So please, send him that message." And Ransom heads off up to the house and then discovers a scene of two adult men wrestling this boy and fighting with him. And he happens upon this scene and he gets involved in breaking it up. And there's this conversation between the two men who are there, and then they say okay, and he tells the boy to go home, the young boy to go home, and then he goes in, and it turns out that he knows one of the men. He recognizes him from I think he went to university with him, and he sort of says, "I remember him. I thought he was a great guy for a little while, but then his charm wore off on me, and I hated him for the rest of the time I was at university." And then they invite him in and they say, oh, they recognize him and they invite him for a drink. And I think they give him some whiskey or something like that, some sort of maybe it's champagne or something. I don't know, some alcohol. And it turns out that it's laced with something or other. And he starts to get very drowsy and woozy, and then he falls over. And then he overhears this conversation about how they're going to take him somewhere and they need to give him another dose of before to make sure he doesn't wake up until they take him. But what he overhears them saying, let's see if I can find the page. It's so in my edition it's page 13. Um, and this is actually before he gets dosed. He's talking about this gentleman Devine who he knew from school. And he says he felt for him that sort of distaste we feel for someone who we have admired in boyhood for a very brief period and then outgrown. Um, and he's talking about how Devine at university, quote, for a few weeks, his references to the dear old place and to playing the game, to the white man's burden and a straight bat had swept everyone off their feet. So the white man's burden is a really important part of this. That mindset of superiority of we, the white men, with the superior culture and and the achievements that we have this burden to spread this to the uncivilized peoples of the world. And this is a kind of perspective which is you see in taken up by the likes of Imperial, like the Cecil Rhodes Group and the Lord Milner Roundtable, and was it John Ruskin? I think before
Hmm.
them. It's this driving motivation to colonize other places. We are the best and the superior ones with our gadgets and gizmos and our scientific knowledge and our rationality, and we need to spread that. And really, it's just an excuse, isn't it, to conquer
Yeah.
and pillage and plunder.
It's
But
also just, sorry, just the words, white man's burden, is Rudyard Kipling. And that's Brotherhood of Man, and Alan has talked about him coming over and kind of delivering that poem, for the Americans, the passing of the baton from Great Britain to America. But yeah, and definitely a Masonic brotherhood. So all of the, so for this character to say that, means he's definitely and I don't know how much C.S. Lewis knew about that, but he's definitely one of them, those, round table guys.
right, right. And then we get an insight into Weston a little bit later on. So this is on sort of page 16 and 17. This is after they've drugged Ransom and he's kind of half in and out of consciousness listening to them talk. And they're having a disagreement about whether they want to take the boy with them or take Ransom with them. And he's saying Weston, which is Divine's partner, who it turns out Divine is investing in. So Divine's kind of brought some money and he's investing in Weston and his ideas and his projects, right? So Divine's kind of the financier in this relationship. And Weston is saying sulkily on the bottom of page 16, the boy was ideal, incapable of serving humanity and only too likely to propagate idiocy. He was the sort of boy who, in a civilized community, would be automatically handed over to a state laboratory for experimental purposes. So that's giving you that sort of eugenicist view of they are lower stock and they're a higher stock. They are people who breed well and have these
Mhm.
qualities that need to be preserved, and then those who don't. And the ones who don't are only good for laboratory experiments, and therefore would make a better sacrifice, which is what we find out is the purpose of taking somebody with them. They want to take a sacrifice, and then
Also, just quickly speaking to his mindset, Weston's mindset, there is a comment that's made a little bit later about he never would have stumbled on, Ransom never would have stumbled onto their cottage and been able to get in there unannounced if they'd had a dog. And I think it was Devine said, well, if you hadn't used your dog as an experiment, I think that dog's name was Tartaria or something, Tartarus, something, and it was an interesting name, which escapes me right now. But he had used it for an experiment,
right, I missed that.
I mean, it's humorous yet, except it allows C.S. Lewis to get a dig in there because he was actively against vivisection, which was something that was being done in the scientific experiment community quite a bit, and that is taking something that is living and cutting it while it lives to see what sort of reactions. And I was thinking about that this morning, and it really, you have to have a pause. You've got to just think about the mind that could do that because that's not science, that's something else.
That's bent.
That's exactly. That's very bent.
Yeah, and to continue that conversation, he says, uh, Devine is justifying why Ransom's a better candidate for this sacrifice. He says, if we take the boy, it might be Scotland Yard might be interested in the boy if he goes missing. He said, this busybody, on the other hand, will not be missed for months, and even then, no one will know where he was when he disappeared. He came alone, he left no address, he has no family, and finally, he's poked his nose into the whole affair of his own accord. And then Weston replies, well, I confess I don't like it. He is, after all, human. The boy was really almost a preparation, which is just like so he sees this simple boy possibly has learning disability or something like that as not even human.
Hmm.
And that's the mindset that allows you to
Hmm.
strap something to a table and carve it up while it's still alive. So this is the kind of the setting, the situation. Ransom succumbs to the the potion, whatever it is that they give him. They dose him, and then in chapter three, he wakes up and he's in a very strange place. And this is where we get the heavy influence of H.G. Wells, because this next scene, this next section of the book, as they are traveling on a journey, it was heavily influenced by the book you mentioned of H.G. Wells. Was it The First Man on the Moon?
Hmm.
Because
Or the
there's a
first
character
man in the
there
moon.
who invents a type of material which allows basically a kind of anti-gravity effect that enables space travel. And I read that a little blurb of that story, and the description of that matches very closely to what C.S. Lewis uh, describes in this next section, which I think was really well done, because I really like descriptions of the perspectives changing,
Hmm.
and the way physics and gravity altered their experience when they leave Earth in a spaceship and they
Hmm.
are traveling to an unknown destination. At this point, Ransom doesn't know where he's going, and he has to go through this kind of shock of being told, "Yeah, you're on a spaceship, and you're 85,000 miles away from the surface of Earth now." And he realizes there's nothing he can do about it. And so there's this whole section of him just adjusting to this new reality that he finds himself in. But what do you think about that whole section, the traveling and the spaceship? Because it's an interesting ship, because it's actually a globe with a hollow center,
Hmm.
and they say that like the Earth, it has a gravitational pull towards the center, and so they have this new center of gravity on a much smaller sized object, and so it distorts their perspective. As they're walking around, the walls are kind of shifting and changing, and corners level out as you step over them. And yeah, it's a very kind of almost psychedelic and trippy description of that whole experience. But this is where Ransom experiences space and
Hmm.
what space is actually like. And this kind of goes back to, I think, what you were saying about the medieval view on things,
Hmm.
and where C.S. Lewis used that to inform this description, because I like this. I really enjoyed his account of, of the sensations and the experiences of being up in space, being very different to what we're kind of told and what we're expected, and how it's depicted in a lot of sci-fi, which is this cold, lifeless vacuum which will suck your eyes out of your head if you're
Hmm.
exposed to it. Very anti-life, very inhospitable. That's not at all how C.S. Lewis portrays it in the book.
No, I actually marked a section if you want me to read a little bit of
Yeah.
the, yeah, about how he describes it. Well, there are a couple of things in the ship. You have to position yourself if you want to have dark, because one side of the ship is always in the light 24/7, and the other half of the ship is always in the dark. So if you need to adjust, you can sleep with blinders and so forth. But if you need to block out the light, you'll have to change your position on the ship. But It says, but Ransom, as time wore on, became aware of another and more spiritual cause for his progressive lightening and exaltation of heart. A nightmare long engendered in the modern mind by the mythology that follows in the wake of science was falling off him. He had read of space. At the back of his thinking for years had lurked the dismal fancy of the black, cold vacuity, the utter deadness, which was supposed to separate the worlds. He had not known how much it affected him till now. Now that the very name space seemed a blasphemous libel for this empyrean ocean of radiance in which they swam. He could not call it dead. He felt life pouring into him from it every moment. How indeed should it be otherwise, since out of this ocean the worlds and all their life had come? He had thought it barren. He saw now that it was the womb of worlds, whose blazing and innumerable offspring looked down nightly even upon the earth with so many eyes, and here with how many more? No, space was the wrong name. Older thinkers had been wiser when they named it simply the heavens which declared the glory, the happy climes that lie where day never shuts his eye, up in the broad fields of the sky. He quoted Milton's words to himself, lovingly, at this time and often.
Beautiful. Yeah, I underlined that whole section as well because it is such a, and that really just that image, that description is the the sort of the inversion, the opposite, the antidote to this rationalist, scientific, materialist view on things, saying which says, well, it's all just biochemical reactions.
Mhm.
It's all you're just a bag of chemicals, and you're just being triggered by your environment, and that's all you are. And it all comes from it's all accidental mutations and chemical reactions with no plan or purpose or design behind it, right? And it
Mhm.
and this and therefore everything is dead,
Mhm.
and somehow life has come out of this deadness, and therefore life is dead, and therefore we don't have to respect life and treasure
Right.
life and individuals, and therefore we can strap them to a table and slice them up and see what happens, right? This is going the opposite way, and it's saying no. Even like every place is infused with vitality and life. All
Mhm.
things, even the apparent blackness, emptiness, vacuous space has
Mhm.
life in it. And in fact, more life. Because as he's basking and lying around, because there's nothing to do on this journey that takes, I think, a month, 28 days or something, he's just lying around and he notices that he's feeling more energized and more healthy and more alive than he's ever felt on Earth.
Yes.
And the explanation is that he's getting all these rays of energy which don't penetrate the atmosphere of Earth. And this to this bit, and I think it mentions that just before this the section you just read. It says Weston admitted a scientific basis for these sensations of vitality and life. They were receiving, he said, many rays that never penetrated the terrestrial atmosphere. And it just reminded me of all the sort of geoengineering, blocking out the sun, spraying the sky, trying to cut off our access to that life-giving force, which is raining down on the planet all the time. It's absurd on the face of it when we know that all life comes from the sun. The sun grows and feeds the plants, and the animals eat the plants, and we eat the plants and the animals, and there's it all comes from the sun. It's all just processed sunlight on
Mhm.
this chain of energy and life, eating life and sustaining life, right? So it's completely obviously absurd on the face of it to want to block out the sun. You have to be
Mhm.
a maniac to try and push that, and then you have to be kind of asleep to believe and go along with that being a good idea and and think the people who are doing that are doing it for your benefit, right?
Well, there's something too. I want to come back because I don't want to interrupt your storytelling flow, but I want to make sure that we talk about the planets in general and archons. So I can't forget to talk about that. But I think
I'll make a
I
note.
mean, what you were just describing there. It reminded me of the section that I just read there. I think I missed my calling. I should have been an editor because I always like to make things, nobody would believe this, but I actually like to make things shorter. So that one sentence there, though, if I truncate it, he said, a nightmare that follows in the wake of science was falling off him. So I just
Mm.
shortened that sentence a little bit to get to, I always like to get to what's the essence, what's the heart of the matter. So it's the nightmare that follows behind science as he goes deeper and deeper into the heavens, not space, was falling away from him. And I like that. That's just cool.
Yeah,
All right,
and
carry
so
on. You're doing great.
two the next two bits I wanted to mention is to go back to the mindset of these people that spread this nightmare of science, right? So I have a note here, page 23, 24 in my copy. I've written Weston's scientific outlook. So there's this whole kind of the classic thing where James Bond gets captured and then the villain spends 20 minutes explaining all the plan, during which time James Bond managed to activate his laser beam watch and escape or whatever it is. And then there's like spoof films where it's like take him into the back room and tie him to a chair and explain our plans to him and then kill him. Is that kind of moment happens here, and Weston's sort of talking to Ransom. I'm just going to find the quote. I got it on page 23. Um, yeah, so Ransom's at first he won't believe that he's in a um, spaceship, and he's told that he's going to a place called Malecandra. And he asks, "Well, how does the spaceship work?" And then the answer he gets is, "As to how we do it, uh, I suppose you mean how the spaceship works. There's no good you asking that. Unless you were one of the 4 or 5 real physicists now living, you couldn't understand. And if there were any chance of you understanding, you certainly wouldn't be told. If it makes you happy to repeat words that don't mean anything, which is, in fact, what unscientific people want when they ask for an explanation, you may say we work by exploiting the less observed properties of solar radiation." So there, you're getting that attitude of the hoarding of knowledge and
Mhm,
information, which Alan often told us, these high levels of science of building and civilizations up and letting them degrade and all the while keeping masses of people under control and not realizing the power that they have to
mhm,
get this class of people off their backs, right? Seeing it as an ancient science, and that the information is never lost. Someone somewhere has it, right? That attitude is embodied here because he's like, even if you could understand it, we wouldn't tell you, because you're obviously not evil like us. So why would we?
Yeah.
That's kind of the tone, I think. Um, and then Ransom says, "Yeah, oh yeah." So they go back and forth on the existence of a planet called Malecandra, and Ransom says, "You can't really ask me to believe that. Why has no one heard of it? Why has it not been in all the papers?" And then Weston says, "Because we're not perfect idiots," meaning we're not going to tell everybody the truth. We're not going to reveal the way we do things, the way we stay in contact,
Mhm.
the way we stay in control. Sorry. We're not perfect idiots. And then he says, "Once and for all, I'm not going to tell you." Ransom asks, "Which planet is it in our terminology?" And he says, "I'm not going to tell you. If you know how to find out when we get there, you are welcome to do so. I don't think we have much to fear from your scientific attainments." So it's this sort of, oh, if you are not scientifically accomplished, then we have nothing to fear from you. Not your faith, not your strength of character, not your moral standing. None of that matters. None of that means anything. None of that is valuable. It's what scientific achievements have you accomplished, right?
Hmm.
So that's it. And then later on, same page, it's he's saying, what has this all to do with me? And he says, I might reply by asking you why you crept into my backyard like a thief. He says, as it is, I admit that we have had to infringe your rights. So kidnap him and take him to another planet. A minor infringement of rights there. My only defense is that small claims must give way to great. As far as we know, we are doing what has never been done in the history of man, perhaps never in the history of the universe. We have learned how to jump off the speck of matter on which our species began. Infinity, and therefore perhaps eternity, is being put into the hands of the human race. You cannot be so small minded as to think that the rights or the life of an individual or of a million individuals are of the slightest importance in comparison with this. So there you have it right there. The individual is not important. A million individuals are not important.
Hmm.
And the beautiful thing about this, though, is that in the climax of the book later on, when Weston is again explaining his point of view, it's demonstrated logically and clearly that it makes no sense to hold this point of view.
Hmm.
And that's really great to see later on. That kind of reminiscent of the debate that we talked about in the intro that you mentioned between C.S. Lewis and I forget her name now, but yeah, there's a kind of a logical and a breakdown and analysis of Weston's point of view, and it's shown to be kind of incoherent and
Hmm.
nonsensical. Um, and the second thing I wanted to mention about their worldview is a bit later. It's on page 31. And this is a good sort of segue into the beings and the that we meet. They're discussing these beings. This is before they've arrived. And they're telling, no, that I think does he overhear this conversation? I think Ransom overhears this conversation, so they don't know he's listening. And they're talking about a creature called a Sorn,
Hmm.
and they're
Hmm.
saying that these things are scary. They're hard, they're obviously scary because Ransom's going to be scared of them when he sees one. And then there's a back and forth between Devine and Weston. And then Weston continued, and this time Devine seemed to interrupt him. You're not losing your own nerve, are you? He said. He was then silent for some time as if listening, and finally he replied, if you are so fond of the brutes, you'd better stay and interbreed. If they have sexes, which we don't yet know. Don't you worry. When the time comes for cleaning the place up, we'll save one or two for you, and you can keep them as pets, or vivisect them, or sleep with them, or all three, whichever way it takes you. So again, just that
Hmm.
insight into how they view these other beings. They're brutes.
Hmm.
They are something to be chopped up, to be abused, to be kept as pets, and this is that arrogant view of other beings and other life forms that the Western and Divine just can't let go of. But C.S. Lewis he does a really ingenious thing later in the story to highlight how they are actually the brutes, and he does it using language, and
Hmm.
that's a really good point. Just a little teaser for later how he does that is when I realized that's what he'd done, the way he'd made them sound like brutes because they sound like brutes to people who aren't psychopaths,
Hmm.
but he does another thing with their language and the way they speak later on, and the way he writes down what they say that reinforces it and kind of makes them seem to be the sort of backwards
Hmm.
one in the exchange, right? So that's
It
just a
was,
couple.
no,
Yep.
go ahead. Sorry.
Those are the two parts I wanted to mention that I had notes for the this this the mindset of Western and Divine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that was a pivotal scene too, there, though, that you were just giving that mindset because that was Ransom was up in the middle of what you would call night. He had gone back to the kitchen to make sure because one of his duties was making the food. So he wasn't sure he'd prepped everything. And it was then that he stumbled upon this, the two of them Devine and Weston having this conversation, it was then that he realized that Devine and Weston believed that the Sorn, these brutes, these animals, brutes, wanted them to bring something from Earth that they assumed, they weren't clear on it, but they assumed the Sorn wanted for a sacrifice. And it was at that point that Ransom put two and two together and realized that he was to be the sacrifice when they landed on this other planet. So that gives him a whole different perspective on what's going to happen when he exits the ship.
And then in the closeout of that chapter, it says he makes a decision. He could face death, but not the Sorns. And then here it gives us a little insight into Ransom as well. He says just two very simple sentences, but this is where the Christianity comes through if you know what to look for and you're paying very good attention. He just says Ransom was a pious man. He hoped he would be forgiven. And then
Mhm,
it kind of goes on from there. But just those two little sentences gives you that little insight that there is a Christian
mhm.
underpinning to this story, but as you said, it doesn't break through and become very overt and very obvious at all. So then the planets is there's a bit here that I've highlighted as well where he's thinking about the planets because they come to arrive. Oh no, hang on, sorry, they're still on the way. Let me see. That's it. So they're still sorry, they're still traveling. It's actually a few chapters, isn't there, where they're doing this journey. And this page 35 in mine, in my edition, they're um they're approaching their destination, and Ransom starts thinking about how they're coming down to land, and he talks about how they're falling out of the heaven into a world. So they're on this approach. And he says, nothing in all his adventures bit so deeply into Ransom's mind as this. So he's enjoying being in the heavens so much, and now he realizes he's descending. Now he's coming back down to some sort of planet, but he doesn't know what it's going to be like. But then he says he wondered how he could ever have thought of planets, even of the Earth, as islands of life and reality floating in a deadly void. Now, with a certainty which never after deserted him, he saw the planets, the Earths, as he called them in his thought, as mere holes or gaps in the living heaven, excluded and rejected wastes of heavy matter and murky air, formed not by addition to, but by subtraction from the surrounding brightness. And yet he thought beyond the solar system, the brightness ends. Is that the real void, the real death? Unless, he groped for the idea, unless visible light is also a hole or gap, a mere diminution of something else, something that is to bright unchanging heaven, as heaven is to the dark, heavy earths. The moment of his arrival in an unknown world found Ransom wholly absorbed in a philosophical speculation. That might be a good place to pick up the topic you wanted to mention about archons and planets. I don't know if you want to leave that, talk
Uh,
about that now, or I'll leave that for a little bit
sure,
later.
yeah. So we once we land in a little bit after I talk about the planets, we'll get the names of the beings that are encountered, the brutes, the animals, and find out a little bit about the background. But there is a character that when they land that Ransom will hear about referenced over and over. And his name is Oyarsa. Oyarsa. And so, but Ransom will have to piece this together in all of his adventures and encounters that he has when he lands on the planet. Well, Oyarsa is an archon or ruler. He's the lord of the planet, Malecandra. And I just the, what Lewis has woven into this trilogy is a medieval view of the planets in part, but it's also a reworking that goes back much further than medieval times, and you could even call it the earliest Christian thinker times. And that is what inhabits the worlds, what gives them each their unique quality. So Ransom learns that the silent planet that is Earth, that the inhabitants of Malecandra and presumably the rest of the universe call Thulcandra or Thulcandra, is silent because it's under a kind of embargo. It's under a blockade. It Earth is kept away from the rest of the planets by design as a punishment because the Archon of Thulcandra, or the Archon of Earth, is the ultimate bent one. So that led me into, kind of digging a little bit more to where Lewis might be getting some of this cosmology that he's created. And the planet is actually mentioned, the word, or whatever, the Hebrew, the Greek word, but the word planet is mentioned in the Christian Bible as a wandering star. And so the planets, this is from Jude, okay? Jude 13. Planets in the creation account are wandering stars or fallen angels. And so Lewis may have taken some of that in the Book of Enoch. This is just a little bit straight out of the book of the wiki on the Book of Enoch, is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic religious text ascribed by tradition to the patriarch Enoch, who was the father of Methuselah and the great-grandfather of Noah. The Book of Enoch contains unique material on the origins of demons and Nephilim, why some angels fell from heaven, an explanation of why the Genesis flood was morally necessary, and a prophetic exposition of the thousand-year reign of the Messiah. So Enoch is not a canonical scripture for most Jewish or Christian church bodies, but
Mm.
what that means is it's not in the canon. It's not in what they call the holy book. When they get together at their councils and say, we're going to put these books in there, Enoch is included in a couple of recognized, organized Christian groups, but not very many of them. But in there, you get the idea of planets being wandering stars or fallen angels. Now, on Oyarsa or Malecandra, Oyarsa is he is seemingly not bent. That's all I can, he doesn't appear to be bent. In fact, kind of going against the what I just laid out there with Book of Enoch and so forth, what C.S. Lewis seems to have done is to put Earth or Volcandra under the reign of the bent one, who we would call Lucifer or Satan or the devil or whatever. And because of that, the rest of the planets have taken a look at what has happened under the reign of the bent one and said, let's keep those people from coming up to our planets. Let's say no, you're not welcome and you can't do that. And so the Devine and Weston may be their first encounter with Thulcandrans or Earthlings. So, and as we learn later on, it really just kind of confirms their sad suspicion that maybe all of the inhabitants there are just as bent as the Lord that rules over them. But that's why they called it. That's why C.S. Lewis called it the Silent Planet, because it had no way to connect with the others in the heavens. It was cut off from heaven
Hmm.
until such time as they could be redeemed.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the timing of it, but it's what stood out to me, and we might be getting a little bit ahead, but in painting um Malecandra, this place, it has a functioning, it has a hierarchy that doesn't seem to have evil at the top. It has a hierarchy that's good all the way up,
Mhm.
and that's, I think, the big contrast that to that that actually Ransom struggles with, because he makes contact, he starts to get to know these other beings, and on a number of occasions he feels hesitant to talk about where he's from. He feels shame to describe what humans are like and the things they do to each other. And he's constantly having this difficulty where he's trying to ask a question and he's thinking from the point of view of bent Fulcandra and the way things work there. And they look at him like, that question doesn't make sense here.
And an example of that would be um, when he first lands there and he's hungry and he doesn't know what's edible, and then he discovers something that is, it turns out to be just some kind of an amazing nectar. And it's so amazing and that he thinks he might like to go and have some more right away. But some feeling or sensation stops him from going back for more nectar. But as he encounters some of these beings, some of those questions that he's asking are, well, why don't you just keep eating that or drinking that? Or, so you only have sex at such and such a, for, why don't, if it's a pleasant sensation for you though, right? So why don't you do it all the time? And he realizes that they're looking at him without any comprehension at all. And finally, one of them begins to understand what he's getting at. And the thing that they point out is what is the Malecandra is the planet, but the thing that makes up the Handra is the element of Earth. So Handra, they may as well eat Handra. They may as well eat dirt. It's such an alien concept that they would overdo something, that they would, have too much sex or eat something when they weren't hungry. So we might as well eat dirt. It's just such so foreign to them.
Well, so this is probably a good point to actually introduce some of the beings that Ransom comes across. And I think the first one will be the Hrossa. And I remember sending you, because it took, with you know the arrival of my son and various things going on, it's taken us a while to read this very admittedly short novel and get together to make this recording. But I did send you a message saying, do you ever feel like you just want to go and live with the Hrossa, And because that's the sensation I got when I got to know about this species, the way they work and live, and what's important to them and what isn't important to them as well. And that's one of the wholesome sort of joyful things about this book, I think, is discovering this new society, this group of creatures and how they live, as Ransom discovers them. And he's a very curious man, and he's a philologist, so he's learning their language and giving us this account. And that was a really, that's the part of it that just made me feel good, I think. So this species is called the Hrossa, and he let me see if I can dig up the page where he first talks about them and describes them, because it's quite an entertaining description. There's sort of a combination of three animals, I think. So Yeah, so basically he finds that there's this creature. He's drinking some water, and then this creature starts to emerge from the water, and he's quite creepy. But he notices that he says, the water, it was agitated. Circles shuddered and bubbles danced 10 yards away from his face. Suddenly, the water heaved, and a round, shining black thing like a cannonball came into sight. Then he saw his eyes and mouth, a puffing mouth bearded with bubbles. More of the thing came up out of the water. It was gleaming black. Finally, it splashed and wallowed to the shore and rose, steaming on its hind legs, 6 or 7 feet high and too thin for its height, like everything in Malecandra. It had a coat of thick black hair, lucid as seal skin, very short legs with webbed feet, a broad beaver-like or fish-like tail, strong forelimbs with webbed claws or fingers, and some complication halfway up the belly, which Ransom took to be its genitals. It was something like a penguin, something like an otter, something like a seal. The slenderness and flexibility of the body suggested a giant stoat. The great round head, heavily whiskered, was mainly responsible for the suggestion of seal, but it was higher in the forehead than a seal's, and the mouth was smaller. And he quickly realizes that these creatures can talk, and then they kind of on the next page they get locked in this sort of stalemate where C.S. Lewis writes, the creature leaped back, watching him intently, and they became motionless again. Then it came a pace nearer, and Ransom jumped up and retreated, but not far. Curiosity held him. He summoned up his courage and advanced, holding out his hand. The beast misunderstood the gesture. It backed into the shallows of the lake, and he could see the muscles tightened under its sleek pelt, ready for sudden movement. But there it stopped. It, too, was in the grip of curiosity. Neither dared let the other approach, yet each repeatedly felt the impulse to do so himself and yielded to it. It was foolish, frightening, ecstatic, and unbearable all in one moment. It was more than curiosity. It was like a courtship, like the meeting of the first man and the first woman in the world. It was like something beyond that. So natural is the contact of sexes, so limited the strangeness, so shallow the reticence, so mild the repugnance to be overcome, compared with the first tingling intercourse of two different but rational species. And it's just so like a wonderful explanation. It's quite just sort of magical because it's that life seeing life. Again,
Mhm.
it's that contrast to the way the scientific Weston and Devine view the brutes. Probably looking at them thinking, "Oh, I could make a nice pair of boots from that, the skin of that creature over there." Um, in contrast to that, Ransom sees that life,
Mhm.
recognizes the intelligence, can see the soul, you might say, in the other creature, and then the other creature can see that in him. And there's this like cautious kind of funny dance that they get locked in before they sort of before they build a relationship, start kind of before he realizes it's friendly,
Mhm.
basically. But this is his first encounter with a Hross. And the next section of the book is really him spending time with this Hross and its tribe, I suppose you might say. They kind of live in a tribe, and he starts to learn their language, and he teaches them a bit about himself, and he starts to learn their ways. And a great section sort of describing his experience with them is on page 53 at the bottom. Um, and every now and again, because it takes him a while to feel comfortable around these beings, and every now and again he loses his confidence and he thinks, "Oh, what if they're going to eat me? Or what if something bad's going to happen?" And there's a great paragraph here which says, "It was only many days later that Ransom discovered how to deal with these sudden losses of confidence. They arose when the rationality of the Hross tempted you to think of it as a man. Then it became abominable. A man 7 feet high with a snaky body, covered,
Mhm.
face and all, with thick black animal hair and whiskered like a cat. But, starting from the other end, you had an animal with everything an animal ought to have: glossy coat, liquid eye, sweet breath, whitish teeth. And added to all these, as though paradise had never been lost and earliest dreams were true, the charm of speech and reason. Nothing could be more disgusting than the one impression, and nothing more delightful than the other. It all depended on the point of view. And I put in my notes for this page, animal like man or a man like animal. And it's funny how, like he says, the point of view, the way you view it, actually does affect whether it's a really creepy, weird thing, or whether it's a good thing that's wholesome and uplifting, right? I'm thinking
Hmm.
of like a chimera, these experiments of trying to combine animal DNA with humans to make a sort of hybrid type, creepy, weird. But when my mother's dog comes to stay with us and she's all excited to see me and she's affectionate and I can see the light and the spark of life in her eyes and she recognizes and knows me and we play together and I have that connection there and I can kind of sense that she has affection and recognition and a memory of who I am and she knows me and she's excited to see me. These emotional qualities, that sort of is very heartwarming and uplifting. So yeah, I appreciated that sort of description there. Um, I thought it kind of paints the picture well of what living with the Hross is like. But what appealed to you about the Hross? What did you think about their society and the way they lived? You mentioned their restraint, and I think the conversations that Ransom has with them, asking them, well, do you ever kill each other for food? And he's like, and they say, well, why? There's food everywhere. Why would we
Yeah.
do that? Well, maybe one of you wants something that the other one's got. And he's like, well, we've all got everything. We've got everything we need
Yeah.
because it was designed this way by, they don't say God, they don't say created, but they do say that the world was designed and created. Um, so they have this balance. They're affectionate. They have children. They have families. They are monogamous. But they don't pollute. They don't abuse nature. They don't use it up. They're not digging around. They're not. They're living a balance, I would say, and it's great when Ransom comes up against their perfect sort of. It's innocence in a way. It's kind
Hmm.
of an innocence. They have an innocence, and that fits very well with the Christian worldview of C.S. Lewis in that Malecandra, the earth, is described in Christianity as fallen, as a fallen reality, and this is kind of a picture and experience of what a non-corrupt, non-bent reality or world might look like.
Hmm. The interesting thing, because he's having that dilemma, is this Hrossa something that he should be disgusted by or, find to be pleasing? But he learns a concept there, I think from the Hrossa called Hnau. Hnau. And Hnau, I think the best word that I can come up with for it is sentience.
Hmm.
So now is they you wouldn't kill now. They recognize the now in each other and other now like beings, and so that's an important thing that he learns there too. One thing I liked about the Hrossa, I think is the plural of Hross, but the Hrossa they are warriors, not in the sense of waging war on each other or having any aggressiveness or hostile behavior, but they are strong. They hunt and fish as needed. And there's plenty of food that grows on trees or up out of the ground. They're not vegetarians. They do fish. They have these interesting boats that almost look impossible. Like Ransom was afraid when he got on it with the first Frost that he met that he was going to tip the boat over because it's kind of like a canoe that's been flattened out way too much. It's not a raft. It's not but it stays afloat. And so they have that strong strength that you might associate with a warrior type, but they're not aggressive. And the thing I like most about them is that they're poets. And that so they have this connection to the other heavens and to all of the other now within their own, Malecandran now that is just kind of a beautiful thing. And they don't write things down. So they remember, and there's even some jokes that come later on in the book when Ransom actually does finally meet a Sorn. And this blows his mind open because the Sorn were nothing at all like what he expected them to be, nothing like what Devine and Weston portrayed them. And so he's delivered into the hands of the Sorn who wanted to see him in the first place. And he's relaying what has happened to him. And the Sorn says something kind of sarcastic, like, "Well, I suppose they gave you a poem song about it." Because for the Hross, everything is a poem song. And you get whole genealogies and stories about their life and commemorations. And if a Hross dies naturally or, sadly, in the case of something that Ransom experiences with them because of Malecandran violence, they commemorate it immediately in a long song poem that gives the whole background of that particular Ross and his family and every other Ross who knew him. And so,
And that's a good point as well to mention the conversation they have about kind of moments and memory. And he says they have this conversation, and when Ransom's asking these kinds of questions, like why don't you have so many babies that you overpopulate the area? And they say, well, why would we why would we do that? We only mate at this specific time, and it's a part of your life. You have the early part where you're a child, and then you become an adult, you find a mate, then you have a child, and then you raise that child, and then and we all have this path, and it why would we upset that? And he's like, well, it feels good. Yeah, like you mentioned, and they just don't see it that way at all because their way of looking at it is it's all one thing.
mhm,
And you wouldn't want to repeat one experience over and over and over and over and over again because the reason the experience is so precious and valuable is because of all the things that come before and all the things that come after. In other words,
mhm,
the context of as a whole, that being's life in its entirety is what gives each of the individual bits meaning, and it infuses them with a sense of what is special and what is good, and
mhm,
what is important. And so they wouldn't want to just be repeating a good feeling over and over and over again. Much rather, they recognize that, okay, will you be with that one person, and then at the end of your life, when you've been with that other person for so long, it makes sense, and it lifts up that relationship into something more special than if you just have a string of one night stands where you're just kind of repeating the shallow experience over and over and over again.
mhm,
He describes them as naturally continent and monogamous. Um, and they use the example of poetry to explain this concept, saying that the pleasure of something is the same as the memory of it. So
mhm.
you don't need to keep having that experience over and over again. And they use the example of a poem, and they say that one line in a poem is only made special and important and effective and valuable because of all the lines that come before it and the lines that come after it. You wouldn't take that one line out and just repeat it over and over again because it's such a great line. And that's obvious to them. And this is the way they view life in the same way. There's phases, there's a beginning, a middle, and end, and it's a journey, and therefore you don't need to cling on to any particular experience or moment because, and he says to him, I met you once, the first time we met. The longer I live, the more meaning will be infused into that. The memory of that meeting will be more meaningful the longer I live and the more of my life that surrounds that meeting. It's kind of hard to explain,
No,
but
that's beautiful. You did it
yeah,
perfectly. You took me
and
right back in to reading it. I don't have to keep rereading it because of that.
yeah, that's it. And then there is the tragedy, right? There is the tragedy as you alluded to, and there is this description actually. Let me see if I can just find a page number because they have another line which is fantastic as well, which I'll just try and get quickly. It's on page 69 in my edition, and I just realized I haven't shown everyone which edition I'm reading from, but I will because it's quite nice. So this edition I have is the full trilogy in
Yes,
one hardback, and
very
this is the
nice.
70. I think it's the 75th anniversary edition.
Ah,
So there's no like
nice,
extra materials in it or anything, but it's just a really nice hardback with all, yeah, 75th anniversary collector's edition, HarperCollins, 2013. Um,
nice.
but it's a really nice hardback book and not very portable. But on page 69, they have this. This is when he's kind of feeling out the philosophy and the worldview of the Hrossa, and they say that or the one he's talking to, which is his friend, says, I do not think the forest would be so bright, nor the water so warm, nor love so sweet if there were no danger in the lakes.
Mhm,
I just think that's a really beautiful quote, just that little bit on its own. It's it's the bad which makes the good good. You know,
mhm,
it's the bitter which makes the sweet sweet. And it's about recognizing that you can't just insulate yourself from anything negative because then there would be no positive, right? And when we try to block, and this is a great example of feelings in general, is like you shouldn't block out and avoid those negative, quote unquote, negative feelings. Like feelings are all there for a reason, and trying to avoid your sadness or your boredom or your anger or whatever it may be tends to just lead to complications and more problems in the longer term. So
mhm,
I think that's just a nice quote to remember that. It's like the danger of the lakes makes all the other stuff really good. And
mhm.
being able to navigate that and survive it or confront it, work around it or whatever. So that's a nice
That
quote to
is a
mention.
nice thing too, and it just makes me think that even though this is not a bent planet with a bent archon, it's not a perfect world. There is some hardship or danger in the water. There's some, but what you would call it would be natural danger or natural hardship. And so, but that gives them a complexity of being and emotions. It gives them something to write poetry about. It's it is not, it is in the heavens, but it is not heaven.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's
that's a great way
something
to put
that
it.
they're all very aware of. The the order, I think I'll just do this, is give us the order of the beings. First, he met the Hross or a Hrossa who introduced him to the rest of his people, his Ross, and the Sorn are seem to be above them. If we're going to have there's this, that, and the other. The lower beings are by no mean, this is not a class system and it's not an
Hmm.
intelligence system because okay, Fiffle the Fiffle
Yeah, I think you did well. That's how I've been
the
imagining
Fiffletrig,
it sounds.
they're a Malecandrian species of Hnau, okay, and they have heads that are kind of pointed like an insect head. They've got huge eyes, a large brain, and frog-like bodies, and very frog-like bodies. They rest and lean on their elbows on the ground, and their movements are quick and insect-like. But they are also incredible metallurgists and inventors and creators. So there's not a lack of, that large brain. So as the Sorn is on they're more the rational, not like Spock like with no emotions. I didn't get them to be that, but they're the more philosopher kind of science, rational philosopher, less on emotions than the Ross for sure.
Yeah, you might say
And
the the more left brain leaning.
yes, yeah. And then so that's those are the Hnau on the planet, those three. And at one point when Ransom is talking to a Sorn, he said, "Oh well, we'll just have the Fiffletriggy make that for us." And Ransom said, "What?" He's questioning that, and the Sorn said, "All we have to do is think of something that we want, and the Fiffletriggy will make it for us." And he then Ransom is still he's thinking like a an Earthling or a Thalkandran, and he's thinking that they're then some kind of slave class for the Sorn, and the Sorn say, "Oh no, no, it's not like that at all. You know, if they want to make it for us, they will." But they want to because that's how their minds work. You know, they probably will want to,
Yeah.
and they like the solving and the puzzle solving and the creation process. So those are the now. And then I mentioned that Oyarsa was the Archon or the Lord, and at several points Ransom keeps saying, "You're God, you're God," and they laugh and go, "No, Oyarsa's not God." And then you learn that the Creator is not on their planet at all, and that's Maladil, I think is his name. And Maladil is the supreme being of the heavens. He's God of he's creator God. But there's one other being that we haven't talked about, and that's because you can't really see him, but sometimes you can. And that's the Eldil or the Eldilla, and they're what I you might think of as, I mean, I don't know. Are they angels? Are they spirits? Are they woodland fairies? Are they
Yeah.
sprites? You know, he would think sometimes a Ransom would think that he'd seen something, but then it would just kind of um, twinkle off and into nothingness, and sometimes you would feel it almost as a breeze, but that those are the Eldil or the Eldilla. So that's those are the inhabitants of Malecandra.
And it is a kind of hierarchy, right? Because you have Oyarsa, the Lord, and the Eldila, they're kind of his messengers.
Hmm.
They'll deliver news and they'll carry messages back and forth from the Hnau to Oyarsa, and so they're sort of like below him, and then below that is Hnau. But then there's also beasts, and the only one we really meet in this story is this kind of big like carnivorous fish that that attacks them. I think we see it twice. It attacks
Hmm.
when they first arrive, and that's how Ransom is able to escape from Weston and Devine, actually. And then later on, another one attacks, and the Hrossa take Ransom on a sort of hunting trip, and they successfully manage to take out this carnivorous fish. But they explain that because the fish is carnivorous and dangerous and trying to hunt them, but that's its nature, and it's their
Hmm.
nature to band together and hunt the fish and kill it. That this is not done out of like, but they were both. It's like it's hard. How do they explain it? It's like they're in agreement. It's that's the deal between them, and they're both happy with that arrangement because it's
Hmm.
been designed that way. And so there's
Hmm.
so below the Hnau, there is also a level of what we would probably say animal,
Hmm.
as isn't there, of a more simpler intelligence, a more simpler consciousness. So they have that hierarchy going up, yeah,
Hmm.
and everybody's knows their level, is content with it and happy with it, not jealous, not trying to climb higher up,
Hmm.
not trying to compete, exploit, and because Ransom says. I'm gonna find out who the real master is.
Hmm.
He meets with the Hrossa and he's thinking about the Sorn. He's like, oh, I think okay. He thinks the Sorn must be the intelligentsia, and they must be the real brains, and they must be the real masters, right? And then every conversation he has is like, no, no, we do our thing, they do their thing. Like, oh, they're singing songs again, you know, and yeah, and it's just this wonderfully sort of well, maybe a bit of idealistic kind of it's balanced um and yeah, but like you said, not without danger, but natural,
Hmm.
kind of as the creator intended. Maybe you might say it that way. I'll think of it that way.
I heard someone talking about the books. I was looking for somebody to break it down from the Christian perspective as a piece of
Hmm.
Christian writing. And one comment that he made was that with science and materialism and the greater good concept, you get exactly what we have in modern time in the 20th and 21st century is it that brings us socialism slash communism, fascism, which are all focused on organization and an ordered world. Everything must be ordered. And that is something that evidently you see in the in H.G. Wells' book, The First Man in the Moon, is these ant-like creatures that are called selenites. And they have they're just completely organized and efficient, and they just basically are programmed to do that one thing that they do. And so this person was talking about C.S. Lewis' vision is that it is also organized and ordered, and there is a hierarchy. And he said you might call it a theocracy. So
Yeah.
he's given a world in which there is an order, but nobody feels that they're not happy with where they are in the order because it's more in line with nature. It's the natural order,
And
which is
it's not like
interesting.
the Sorns come along and say, right, we're the intermediaries between Maleldil,
Oyarsa or
yeah, or
Melilda,
yours,
yeah,
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 you know,
yeah,
it doesn't have that priest class unless you want to count the Eldila, but they're not because the Eldila and Oyarsa are more like they're more ethereal. They're not really
yeah,
solid.
right,
Oyarsa's voice is described as a voice. What is it? It's something like a voice that doesn't come from blood, something like that.
right, yeah,
So they're semi-physical, but they're mostly light or spirit
or
or
energy,
not
yeah, yeah,
or energy, yeah, not dense matter. And and so because of their nature, the hierarchy is established. And it's not one group saying we're going to be on
right,
top, right? And you're going to be following our rules and we're going to have our holy book that only we can read and interpret and you're going to have to come to us to understand what God said in the, none of that.
right,
It's just the nature of things and the design of things make it clear, and because it's clear, nobody questions it, fights against it, rebels against it, tries to up topple the person at the top. Like you don't get the sense that there's any like it would be laughable if someone was going to say, oh well, why don't you kill Oyarsa and become the ruler yourself?
right,
They would
right.
just be like, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? Like I'm perfectly happy as whatever I am, the Piffle Trigger. And another interesting thing about these races, I guess you might call them species, he has a conversation with the Fifiltriggy who's carving into a picture of him into a piece of rock as a memorial of this of what's happened. And Fifiltriggy says that in their society, the women have more importance than the men, whereas in the Sorn society, the men have more importance than the women.
Hmm.
And that was just an interesting detail that's kind of thrown in there as well. So yeah, it's like
Hmm.
hierarchy and balance
Hmm.
and nature and design
Hmm.
being allowed to speak for itself, I think, in this place. And yeah, it's kind of it's appealing because what we have here on Thulkandra is, is not a hierarchy of based on good. It's a hierarchy based on exploitation and lies and deceit and control and slavery. And it's very
Hmm.
painful for those of us who become aware of that and cast around for solutions. And when you realize it's been this way, who knows how long? Probably, but now I look back and I see the pyramid structure throughout history. Maybe it was a pharaoh, maybe it was a king, maybe it was a president, maybe it was a pope, but every single time, it's a
Hmm.
pyramidal hierarchy with a small, like either one person or a small group at the top, and no matter what they call themselves, it's the same structure. It's the same sort of strategy that they're using, right? And so it's great to read this wholesome alternative to that. As fictional as it may be, I
Yeah.
find this kind of thing so wholesome and enjoyable to read. So,
Yeah. That's another thing too, though, about the idea of Volcandra or Earth being blockaded and not and silent because it couldn't communicate with the heavens is here in a way. Devine and Weston are playing the role that you get in H.G. Wells' Things to Come, where you've got the scientific elite. And what do they want to do? Their progress, their end goal is Mars, right? It's going to Mars. But
yeah,
what do you have with Bezos or Musk? It's
yeah,
Mars, which is very interesting to me. And this is someone, and certainly Alan Watt has pointed out repeatedly that they just have to get off of this planet. They have to go there now. And so I may have to, it may be kitty time out. They've had their nap and they're going to be ready to go outside. But what what they've said is that what Alan said to Jackie Petru in the Waiting for the Miracle, and he has said it, I think, in others that are maybe more easily accessible to people. But what he said is, I'm just telling you, basically what they believe. And then at one point, and Andrea posted this in the Telegram book channel. At one point, Alan just laid it out and he said, I'm telling you that they cannot leave Earth, uh, but they really, really want to. They're imprisoned here.
hmm
And that's, I mean, that really takes us to the heart of what, the Archon system and Earth or Thulkandra being under a blockade, and they know it. And this is what Alan is pointing out. The elite know it, and that they know, but they're always trying to get around that. Well, we're not really trapped here, and to prove it, we're going to Mars. Have they been there yet? it's it's interesting.
yeah. Wow, and it's that thing of, well, I don't know what is this? How does the saying go? Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Yeah. Uh,
So
uh,
while they're going carrying out their crackpot schemes that they know are never going to work and are doomed to fail, they'll enslave the rest of us
yeah.
and lie to our faces and manipulate us and gaslight us and just continue. Somebody told me today actually that here in England, the the ownership of land. Okay, no, so let me rewind a little bit. We were talking about this big project that's going underway, and all these buildings have to be built. And before they build the buildings, they've got to test the land to see if there's anything, unexploded bombs or, anything, any reason that can prevent this land being built on. And the person I was talking to told me that the rights to any mineral deposits that are found belong to Lord such and such. And then another place that he'd worked, I think it was one of the power stations, maybe one of the nuclear ones, same deal. The rights to the mineral deposits on that piece of land belong to Lord such and such. And the other person on the call told me that, well, did you know that the ownership of land in England has not changed in roughly a millennia? It's the same families, the same groups, the same lineage who've pretty much owned the same amounts and plots of land for 1,000 years, maybe longer.
Mhm.
you know.
Well, this is something that Alan told us is that in Canada, and this is, you can look this up, the original mining, and in fact, probably some of the mines still are owned by Rothschild interests. So that's mining in Canada. But he also said, because Canada is a Commonwealth country, that essentially only the topsoil of land belongs to a Canadian. It's the
Mm,
mineral rights. If you're going to drill down, that's crown property.
yeah.
And I do know that the crown has, as grants of favor or privilege, has given, mining or drilling or mineral rights to different, like you're saying, Lord such and such is going to have that.
Wow.
And yeah, probably those have been kept in families for generations. And you have similar kind of constructs here in the US too. Do you mind if I pop down and let them out and then come back?
Not at
Just real
all.
quick. Okay, because
I'll pop in
otherwise
and
they'll
see.
just, yeah.
I'll pop in and
All
see
right,
the sun as well.
great. All right, back.
See you in a minute. Ransom is uh goes on this adventure. And I mentioned earlier in the talk that he has a sort of transformative moment, which he describes as he grows up. And this is actually when he goes on this hunting mission with the Hrossa to fight this carnivorous fish. And they have a special word for the Hrossa that kill this fish. It's called Hnakrapunti, because this carnivorous fish is a Hnakra. And if you kill it, then you're a legend, and you kind of, this is the most heroic thing you can do as a half otter, half, whatever it was, human otter humanoid. But it turns out that this fish kind of reappears, and they go out on a hunting trip, and they manage to kill it. And so he has this description here where he says that when so it's after the excitement and the fight, and he's kind of collecting himself after the experience. He says when he recollected himself, they were all on shore, wet, steaming, trembling with exertion, and embracing one another. It did not now seem strange to him to be clasped to a breast of wet fur. The breath of the Hrossa, which, though sweet, was not human breath, did not offend him. He was one with them. That difficulty which they, accustomed to more than one rational species, had perhaps never felt, was now overcome. They were all Hnau. They had stood shoulder to shoulder in the face of an enemy, and the shapes of their heads no longer mattered. And he, even Ransom, had come through it and not been disgraced. He had grown up. And this is one of the heartwarming, wholesome parts to the story. But what it made me think of is how I've talked about and thought often that this is like a rite of passage, and these Ransom and the two Hrossa, his friends, they go through this experience, they come out victorious, they face down the enemy, and now they're men, and
Mhm.
this is reminiscent of maybe I don't know, hunter gatherer tribes, or maybe Native Americans, or Native Australians, these groups that live a more traditional life closer to nature with a culture that is not, the Western rational sort of Christian culture, let's say, might have, or even like in certain countries in Africa, might have a kind of a rite of passage which marks a child's transition into adulthood. And it could be I've heard different ones where it could be some ordeal where you
Mhm.
got to go out in the woods and survive for 3 days, and if you don't make it, don't come back. you know
Right.
or you, whatever it might be. But that's what I liked about this, is that he goes through this sort of this experience, and he comes out as a man, and then he's transformed after this point, because prior to this point he is a bit concerned for his own safety, and he's flapping around and he's a bit alarmed and scared and he's not sure what's going on. But then he's kind of emboldened and infused with courage after this point. And this is where he responds to the call of Oyarsa to go and meet Oyarsa. Because prior to this, he's aware that Oyarsa wants to meet him, but he's not for going. And then from this point on, he dedicates himself to that journey, and it's kind of an arduous journey. He goes through this landscape that's described as like lunar landscape, and the air gets really thin and he almost dies,
Mhm.
and he pushes on through, and and he makes it in the end. So I wanted to mention that is just another part of the full Kandran culture that has been taken from us in many cases. We don't have this. We have this extended adolescence. We have this, oh, you can
Mhm.
carry on being a child your whole life, no problem. You never have to grow up. You can just carry on watching your Marvel superhero films, and playing your computer games, and there's really you can easily avoid stepping into adulthood in this day and age, in the
Mhm.
systems and the cultures that we've been given. And that's a huge problem, I think. And so I was just happy to see that in here.
Mhm.
Um, and then what happens immediately after that is the tragedy. And it's literally the next page. I was amazed at how quickly this followed on. But I'll read this bit. He says, and then at that moment, Ransom was deafened by a loud sound, a perfectly familiar sound, which was the last thing he expected to hear. It was a terrestrial, human, and civilized sound. It was even European. It was the crack of an English rifle. And Hyoy, that's his friend, at his feet was struggling to rise and gasping. There was blood on the white weed where he struggled. Ransom dropped on his knees beside him. The huge body of the Hross was too heavy for him to turn around. Quinn helped him, and then basically his friend, who he's just become one with, dies in his arms. And before he dies, he calls him Hanakrapunti. He says he gives him that title. And but what Ransom says to him is, to the surviving cross, I'm in the hands of your people. They must do as they will. But if they are wise, they will kill me, and certainly they will kill the other two. And Wynne just replies, one does not kill Hnau. Just no, we don't kill the other Hnau, the creatures that have soul, that have spirit, that have intelligence, and that spark that we recognize is in ourselves as well. He says, we do not kill them. Only Oyarsa does that. Um, and that's just that very sad moment. And then
Mhm.
he goes on the rest of the journey from this point. So I wanted to mention that. Um, and he goes on a journey and he meets a Sorn, and he spends a good deal of time there talking to the Sorn and learning the Sorn's ways and their culture and the things they're interested in. And he spends time with a kind of council of elder Sorns who all grill him and ask him questions about Malecandra and try and get as much information as he can. And he mentions that they get more information from him than he gives. And this is because of their ability to deduce and reason and fill in the
Mhm.
blanks and the gaps and their
Mhm.
extensive knowledge already.
Mhm.
In that he'll answer in his kind of inexpert way, and they'll gain all this extra information just from what he says, and that gives you an insight into the Sorns. They're not writing poems and singing these long songs and celebrating the glory of death in battle and all this kind of stuff like the Hrossa. They're thinkers.
Mhm.
They're more like um, they're more like archivists.
Mhm.
They're kind of, but it's in conversation with the Sorn where they talk about books, and the Sorn says that they've given up with writing books because they'd rather just remember things,
Yes.
and that the Hrossa believe that books spoil poetry, so they won't have
Yes.
any books,
Yeah.
which is great, and it reminds me of the things that I've learned about television and the with each and what we're living through right now with AI and the voices of concern about what this is doing to the human mind and the capacities of the human mind was the same concerns that were raised when writing was and the written word was being spread around. It's like, well, no one's going to remember anything now because you can just write it down on a piece of paper. Our memories are going to suffer now that we can write things down. And with each technological device that is given to us and we're allowed to have, there's like a corresponding payoff or sacrifice that we make with
Mhm.
regards to our own abilities and the things that we're capable of doing. And it's quite, it was just amazing that he put that in there. They're like, oh, yeah, we didn't bother with books, which, was kind of sad for me to read, being a mild enthusiast when it comes to books.
Well, it's funny that you say that, but there is a truth to it, And I mean, I
Oh,
like
yeah.
books and I mean it's wonderful and so forth, but the bard, the idea particularly, well, as Alan told it, the Scottish bard, this wasn't just someone who walked around and told stories and made poems. This was someone who could give you the entire history of their tribe and go. So the bard of one tribe goes across the highlands to visit, and they may never have seen him before. And they are only going to recognize and accept that this is their own, not from the sound or the accent or anything, but the fact that the bard can recite the whole history of his people going back hundreds of years
Right.
almost in a begat type fashion. And there are always elders who know, yep, that's right. Yeah.
To confirm. Yeah, to
Yeah.
confirm it, right? It
But you
reminds
don't
me of,
have that kind of memory nowadays, because I mean, just think how many times here, just in conversation, have I said, I don't remember that. Yeah.
it reminds me of the epic poetry, the Iliad and the Odyssey,
Mm,
Homer,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
And how this was all oral
mm-hmm,
and it was written with a rhythm, and it explains why we're so good at remembering lyrics. And you can not hear a song for 20 years, and then it comes on the radio, you know every single word.
right.
It never leaves you. When you put words to music and rhythm, they stick much more easily. And
Mm-hmm,
this is how these poets were able to remember these epics, and they would stand there and recite them. And yeah, and yeah, there is a lot of truth to the loss, the not the loss, but the atrophy that we've experienced with some of our abilities, and to particularly, the capacity that we can use our mind for
mm-hmm,
remembering things, connecting things, reciting things. It's all being externalized. It's all being put outside of us, and we don't remember birthdays so well because Facebook tells us, and we don't remember phone numbers so well because our phone stores them all. And we might not remember our appointments because our calendar app sends us a little notification on where we need to be and at what time. And the more we outsource these things that we could do ourselves, the kind of less human we become in a way.
mm-hmm.
And so it's great that in Malecandra they saw that and they were like, okay, we'll be cautious. It's not, they don't say there's no books, they do have them, but they say we're not relying on them because for these reasons, and
Mm-hmm.
so that was a great little detail that he threw in there. I feel this is why I feel like there's so much packed into this tiny book that I could
Yeah.
spend so much more time there. I could spend so much more time with Ransom exploring and having conversations and learning their culture and their histories and the things that have happened. Because another part of the history of this place is there's mentioned at some point a part of the world where there are giant monuments that have been carved by the ancients, and that's really all that's mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an even more extensive, big civilization of the past that now nobody really knows anything about, except
Mm-hmm.
there's relics of it over in that valley over there, or however he describes it, which again reminds me of sort of here on Thulcandra, where we have all manner of temples and pyramids, things that are unexcavated and left buried, because they might reveal problems with the official histories and narratives that
Mm-hmm.
were given, right?
Mm-hmm.
And official chronologies as well, which is brings us to it's Orwell, isn't it? Controlling the past to control the future, present, control the present to control the past, control the past to control the future, isn't it? So like, um, yeah. So it's that refreshing uh, uh, um, journey into a place which is free of all the nonsense that we have to deal with here. That's why I find it so uplifting and heartwarming.
Well, from the little bit of looking into it for as far as the trilogy goes, I have heard and read that it just gets better. So,
I'm looking forward to the next one for sure. So the thing I wanted to circle back to as well, and definitely get talk about before we wrap it up, is kind of what I described earlier as the sort of climax of the book. And what happens is Ransom, he goes on this journey. He's summoned by the Archon Oyarsa, and I think I should sort of mention as well that using the word Archon, you know, for anyone who's listened to a lot of David Icke, automatically probably associates that with a negative, a kind of tyrant or a dictator or some sort of.
mhm.
But the you can imagine, at least if it's never existed here, you can imagine at least a benevolent Archon who is
Right.
just and fair and kind and cares for his subjects and doles out justice, right? And that's kind of what we get here. And so the climax of the book, Ransom makes this journey to visit Oyarsa, and Oyarsa's the meeting place is on this little island, and he gets there and he sees that Sorns and Triggs and Hrossa are all there, mixing and intertwining. He tells us a little story about how in the evenings they all sit around and they get drunk, not too drunk, they get a little bit inebriated, and they're all their different specific unique humor emerges. And he says when you're just with one of the species, you don't get this. But when you spend time with them, a mixed group of Sorns and Piffletrigs and Hross, the way they tease each other and the way their humor that emerges and the way they kind of bounce off each other, which I thought is another wonderful detail, in that it's really there's none of the using and abusing of other species.
Mhm.
There's no enslavement, in other words.
Mhm.
And so they all congregate on this island, and then all the what are they called? Those light sprite things. Eldil, is it Eldil? Eldila,
Uh-huh.
Eldila. They all arrive, and he realizes there's thousands, if not
Yes.
hundreds of thousands of them. Um, and he says when he said the sensation of being watched by them wasn't like being surrounded by ghosts. It wasn't like being observed. It was like being seen by something that had a right to see you, which is a very interesting way to describe that sensation. Because the
Mhm.
sensation of being looked at. You look over your shoulder and someone's staring at you. And you get that feeling, or you catch someone's eye, or you get caught when you glance at somebody and they turn around and look at you. There is something there. We do have a sense of being stared at. I think Rupert Sheldrake either wrote a book or he called some experiment he did that, the sense of being stared at. And so that speaks to the hierarchy. These Eldila, they're not these pesky little spirits that can see you wherever you are and watch you when you're on the toilet and watch you when you're doing bad things. You know what I mean? It's like in this place, they have the right to travel and be around and be present and witness everything that's going on because of their nature. And they all descend on this island, and then Oyasa appears, and then they also produce Weston and Devine, who've been since in the meantime they've been captured, and they've murdered some more Hrossa as well, and they're brought here to kind of answer for themselves. And Oyasa is uh, brings them to talk to them and Ransom as well. So this is kind of the climax where there's it's not like a showdown or anything like that. It's not even like a trial. It's just they meet the Archon, the ruler,
Mhm.
the lord of this place, and
Mhm.
then there's quite an extensive conversation. And the thing that I thought was so genius about this that C.S. Lewis did is he makes Ransom, because he's a philologist, he becomes the interpreter. He's translating because Devine and Weston aren't so good with the language yet. They can speak it a little bit, but Ransom is needed to translate it properly. And so when Weston and is speaking, C.S. Lewis writes his language in the way that it would sound to the natives of the planet. And what it comes off as is a kind of like a sort of caveman type language and grammar. which makes him now sound like the brute
Hmm.
because it has this. I'm trying to find a good example of it um, because it's pretty funny. It's quite humorous, and they're basically they're basically asked to explain themselves. Here we are. So Oriosa's asking, he's trying to understand why they've done what they've done, which is come there and kill some of his people, right? And Weston uses Malecandrian. Oh, hang on. Let me go back a little bit. I'm jumping ahead. I'm just trying to find an example where because they carry him away and dunk him in water, don't they? Because
Yeah.
to sober him up a bit. But I'm just trying to find a bit where he talks about the he's trying to threaten them. Oh yeah, he's trying to threaten them. So they arrive and they hear this voice, which is Oyasa speaking to them, and they can't see Oyasa because he's just this shimmer of light in the air. So Devine leans over to Weston and says, ventriloquism, thinking it's a trick, thinking one of the animals that they can see is kind of doing a
Hmm.
ventriloquism act. And so they look around and they find this elderly Hrossa who's fallen asleep. And they think he's the doing this ventriloquism act, right? And then they try and intimidate him. And then so he says, "Why you take our puff bangs away? We very angry with you. We not afraid." Puff bangs being their guns because they've taken their guns off them, right? Uh, you let us go, then we talkie, bellowed Weston. You think we know power. Think you do all you like. You no can. Great big headman in sky. He send us. You no do what I say. He come blow you all up. Poof, bang. And it's just brilliant. It's so clever that it just shows it just makes them seem so ridiculous and so stupid and they're the brutes. They are the
Yeah.
brutes.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful way to do that. And then Oyasa asks, and he's trying to understand them. So Oyasa asks some questions. I'm trying to find that bit as well because it is pretty good. Um, oh yeah, so he gets taken away for a dunking, and then he gets brought back. Weston, this is, and then Oyasa says, "Be silent, you thick one. You, thick one, have told me nothing of yourself, so I will tell it to you. In your own world, you have attained great wisdom concerning bodies, and by this you have been able to make a ship that can cross the heaven. But in all other things, you have the mind of an animal. When first you came here, I sent for you, meaning you nothing but honor. The darkness in your mind filled you with fear. Because you thought I meant evil to you, you went as a beast goes against a beast of some other kind and snared this ransom. You would give him up to the evil you feared. Today, seeing him here to save your own life, you would have given him to me a second time, still thinking I meant him hurt. These are your dealings with your own kind, and what you intend to my people, I know. Already you have killed some, and you have come here to kill them all. To you, it is nothing whether a creature is Hnau or not. Um, but then he replies, and this long speech doesn't shut him up, right? So he carries on. Weston, I see that he says to Ransom, I see that you have chosen the most momentous crisis in the history of the human race to betray it. He turns to Oyasa. This is still Weston. I know you kill us, he said. Me not afraid. Others come. Make it our world. And then Devine jumped to his feet. No, no, Oyasa, he shouted. You no listen him. He very foolish man. He have dreams. We little people only want pretty sunbloods. Sunbloods is gold because they've got
Hmm.
gold on Malecandra, and that's why Devine is there. He just wants to take the gold. You give us plenty sunbloods, we go back into sky. You never see us no more. All done? See? I'm trying to find a bit where he asks him what he cares about, why like why he's doing this. He asks Weston why he's doing this, and Weston says, uh, "Oh, here he is." So Ransom has to interpret, and then he says, this is Weston explaining himself to Oyarsa. To you, I may seem a vulgar robber, but I bear on my shoulders the destiny of the human race. And he's just speaking in fluent English now because he's given up trying to use their language, and Ransom translates all this. Your tribal life, with its Stone Age weapons and beehive huts, its primitive coracles and elementary social structure, has nothing to compare with our civilization, with our science, medicine, and law, our armies, our architecture, our commerce, and our transport system, which is rapidly annihilating space and time. Our right to supersede you is the right of the higher over the lower. Life is greater than any system of morality. Her claims are absolute. It is not by tribal taboos and copybook maxims that she has pursued her relentless march from the amoeba to man, and from man to civilization. Life, of course, snapped Weston. She has ruthlessly broken down all obstacles and liquidated all failures, and today, in her highest form, civilized man, and in me as his representative, she presses forward to that interplanetary leap, which will perhaps place her forever beyond the reach of death. Um, and Oyarsa questions him and asks, do you care about humans as they are? And he says, I don't care if they're the same humans as me, or different humans, that if we have to change what we are as humans. And there's kind of an intimation that he's talking about modification of some kind. Like he doesn't want to keep humans the way they are. And Oyarsa picks up on this and says, "So you wouldn't mind modifying humans to make this whole thing happen?" He says, "No, I wouldn't." And he says, "But you don't care about individual humans because you brought Ransom here, and you were going to sacrifice him." And he says, "No, I don't." And he says, "Well, I can't figure out what you care about then,
That
and
was
why
a
you're
great,
doing this.
yeah,
It
that
doesn't
was a
make
great
sense."
exchange.
I'm just trying to find it, like pick out the best parts of it, but it's
Well,
hard to.
I tell you what, you look for that, and I'm going to go back. This is a little bit before. This is when they're questioning Ransom before Devine and uh, Weston are brought before the, kind of higher Sorns,
Hmm.
and they're just pumping Ransom for information about Volcandra. They're trying to learn. That's their goal. And so it's just, what Ransom realized was that they had a better knowledge than he could ever give them. He was trying to fill in their knowing, but they just seemed to have a better understanding. And they were astonished at what he had to tell them of human history in regards to war, slavery, and prostitution. So their understanding of the situation was just based simply on the limited observation that they could do from him and from their encounter with the other two.
Hmm.
But they couldn't believe what he said about war and slavery and prostitution. And so one of them said, it is because the earthlings, those on Pelcandra, it is because they have no Oyarsa. It is because every one of them wants to be a little Oyarsa himself. So they all want to, that's a very astute observation. All the Fulcondrans want to be ruler.
Hmm.
And the old Sorn, the wisest of the Sorns, perhaps, says they cannot help it. There must be rule, yet how can creatures rule themselves? Beasts must be ruled by Hnau, and Hnau by Eldila, and Eldila by Maladil. These creatures have no Eldila. They are like one trying to lift himself up by his own hair, or one trying to oversee a whole country when he is on a level with it, like a female trying to beget young on herself. Two things about our world particularly stuck in their minds. One was the extraordinary decree to which problems of lifting and carrying things absorbed our energy, and the other was the fact that we only had one kind of now. They thought this must have far reaching effects on the narrowing of sympathies and even of thought. So that was just kind of interesting because when the Sorn are laying it out, you see in their hierarchy, neither Fiffle Triggy or Hrossa or the Sorn are in that pecking order of rule. They're simply observing nature and life. So it is the beasts, it's the Eldila, it's the kind of spirit energy force that keeps the beasts in line. And the spirit energy only answers to creator. And everything else just exists in that natural hierarchy, which to me was very fascinating
Mm.
because this was the thing that Ransom was trying to understand the whole time. Who's over who or
Yeah, that's
whom?
a really good point. Yeah, but that's a great point, and it ties in perfectly to the quote which I've found now.
Okay, good.
And Oyarsa says to Weston, "For though your mind is feebler, your will is less bent than I thought." And the reason we've been using bent all the way through this video is because when Ransom's trying to express a certain word, I think he's trying to come up with evil. It's just they don't have a word for it because it
Right.
doesn't exist there. And bent is the nearest word they have for what he's trying to describe, which is the horrific behaviors and things that happen back on Tulkandra, back on Earth. And but bent is as bad as they can. Oh, it's bent. That's the worst word that they have for this negative stuff. So that's why we've been saying it all the way through. But he says your will is less bent than I thought, because it is not for yourself that you will do all this. No, said Weston proudly. Me die, man live. Oyarsa, yet you know that these creatures, meaning the men, would have to be made quite unlike you before they lived on other worlds. Weston, yes, yes, all new. No one know yet. Strange, big. Oyarsa, then it is not the shape of the body that you love? Weston, no, me no care how they're shaped. Oyarsa, one would think then that it is for the mind you care, but that cannot be, or you would love Hnau wherever you met it. Weston, no care for Hnau, care for man.
Uh-huh.
But if it's neither man's mind, which is as the mind of all other Hnau, is not Maleldil maker of them all, nor his body, which will change. If you care for neither of these, what do you mean by man? This had to be translated to Weston. When he understood, he replied, Me care for man, care for our race, what man begets. He had to ask Ransom for the words race and beget. Strange, said Oyarsa. You do not love any one of your race. You would have let me kill Ransom. You do not love the mind of your race, nor the body. Any kind of creature will please you, only if only it is begotten by your kind as they now are. It seems to me, thick one, that what you really love is no completed creature, but the very seed itself, for that is all that is left. Tell him, said Weston, when he had been made to understand this, that I don't pretend to be a metaphysician. I have not come here to chop logic. If you cannot understand, as apparently you can't either, anything so fundamental as a man's loyalty to humanity, I can't make him understand it. But Ransom was unable to translate this, and the voice of Oyarsa continued. I see now how the Lord of the silent world has bent you. There are laws that all Hnau know, of pity and straight dealing and shame and the like, and one of these is the love of kindred. He has taught you to break all of them except this one, which is not one of the greatest laws. This one he has bent till it becomes folly, and has set it up, thus bent, to be a little blind Oyarsa in your brain. And now you can do nothing but obey it. Though, if we ask you why it is a law, you can give no other reason for it than for all the other and greater laws which it drives you to disobey. Do you know why he has done this? And then Weston says, Me think no such person. Me wise, new man, no believe all that old talk. So this is the scientific rejection of religion, spirituality, etc. Oyasa, I will tell you, he has left you this one because a bent Hnau can do more evil than a broken one. He has only bent you, but this thin one who sits on the ground he has broken, for he has left him nothing but greed. He's talking about Devine.
Mhm.
He's now only a talking animal. and in my world he could do no more evil than an animal. If he were mine, I would unmake his body, for the Hnau in it is already dead. But if you were mine, I would try to cure you. Tell me, thick one, why did you come here? And yeah, it goes on from there. But that bit about it being a little blind Oyarsa in the brain, just echoing the point you just mentioned about the Sorns and their sort of understanding. Yeah, it's it it it's kind of the climax of the book. I think is that we gain insight into where we live and the nature of reality here in Thulkandra on Earth by going on this journey to Malecandra and having these so-called primitive brutes ask a few questions and think about from their point of view the way we do things here, right? And it's so
Mhm.
revealing and so powerful to go on that journey and then at the end of the sort of climax, just the to wrap up that scene, in his sort of mercy, Oyarsa decides to send them all back. And he says, I'll put you back on your spaceship and you can go back to Tulkandra. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to, because he says, you're not mine. He means you're not under
Mhm.
my charge. You're not my
Mhm.
subjects. So I can't kill you. I can't do anything to you or with you, right? I can just talk to you, send you packing, basically.
Mhm.
And that's kind of, there's a little bit more after that, but that's the sort of the conclusion to meeting this Archon who is not an evil Archon, right?
Mhm. So we will meet Ransom again in Perelandra, and we will follow him to an adventure on Perelandra, which is another planet. And so, when do you think we can cover that one?
Very good question. I haven't started reading it yet, so you're a little bit ahead of me. But I do know it's roughly the same size, isn't it? Slightly longer.
Just a little bit longer, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So it's a little bit longer.
so,
So I've actually, this works out well because I've got 2 weeks off work starting next Monday. I got, and in 2 weeks, I could probably get that read in 2 weeks, I think. Because
well,
the trouble at the minute,
why don't we say, for all of you who may be reading along, we hope that you are, because there's always something to learn, that we'll aim for maybe a month or so from now covering this one.
that sounds good to
And
me.
that'll give you that time to do it. So I really enjoyed reading the novel and then doing a little bit of exploration into C.S. Lewis. He is um, considered still to this day, probably the most popular Christian writer. Uh,
Right.
he's certainly right up there. But don't pigeonhole him because he wouldn't be pigeonholed. He wrote all kinds of things, nonfiction and a variety of things that had nothing whatsoever to do with Christianity. He wrote novels that had no Christian mythology in them. He wrote poetry. So I don't even know how many books he wrote, but he wrote a lot. And so that's been an interesting thing to say. I'll mention just one other thing about the way that I like to absorb things, if it's possible, is I always want to read the book and make notes in the margin and underline things and put sticky notes and that kind of thing on it. But if a good audio version exists, then I like to listen to the audio version after I've read the book. And I did that. I'll put a link up to it because this person had a pleasing enough voice. And I think these were done in about 2004, 2005, maybe for the BBC. I can't remember who put them out now, but they're good audio versions. And I wasn't able to get all the way through the audio version because I think for Out of the Silent Planet, it's about 6 hours plus, 6.5 hours. And I
Mhm.
think probably the one for Perelandra is going to be closer to 7 hours. And I got about 5 hours through it. Just various, if I was doing housework or that kind of thing, I would play it. And the one thing that, C.S. Lewis's main book of Christian apologetics is Mere Christianity, which actually came from a series of radio talks that he delivered. They were like radio essays for the BBC. And then he turned those into book form. And I remember reading a note about it, maybe in the foreword of the version of the book that I have, where he said that he made a few editorial changes just because you would speak in a way on the radio with the use of contractions, or you might emphasize something by the inflection of your voice. And so he made little changes in the transcription just to maybe have less contraction and emphasize words in a different way. But what I realized in listening to the audiobook version of this is that the story, now listening to Nick tell the story, I almost don't need an audiobook because Nick has the ability to make the story come alive for me. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm back there, I'm there, I'm back. But when I listen to the audio version, it really is like listening to good radio drama from back in the olden days.
Oh,
It's just
nice.
like, wow, okay, cool, I'm there. Nothing worse than a bad audiobook. But
Yeah, you click on the link and it's a kind of robotic AI
yeah,
transcript
oh,
voice, and
I'm like
I can't do that.
next. No, I can't do that either. But you have that. If if you're ever at a loss for what to do next, then I think books on audio books narrated by Nick Hayes, that could be something. You can bring it to
Oh,
life. But you
I
don't
might look
even
into
need the
that.
book in front of you. You can just tell the story again and it comes alive. That's a good thing. I
Oh,
like
thank you for
that.
the kind words. I appreciate it. Yeah, I will consider that definitely. It's a lot of fun to, and I think just I would encourage it to anybody to get into this habit and practice of reading something, then put the book down, close it down, and explain it in your own words. That's it's a key part of it's just so valuable to do that. And you might fluff it up and make mistakes and not explain things particularly well, but the more you do that, the better you will get at absorbing the information on the page, processing it, and then putting it out as something that other people can benefit from, right? A lot of people, we focus on input, and we get it with documentaries and podcasts and interviews and chat
Mhm.
groups, and it's all in input, 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 but it's really important to have an output as well. And
Yeah.
you do your videos and productions, and I do my live streams, and I just encourage other people out there, even if you don't share it, to just try that out. And right, do your own summary, read a chapter, close the book, hit the record button, and just summarize it, explain it in your own words. And it's just a really important skill, and you might be surprised at what comes out. I know I surprise myself sometimes when I listen back to things. I'm like, did I say that? That actually sounds half intelligent, you know? And then other times I watch back and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I said, you know? So yeah,
Well, I
it's
can
it's
tell you, I can tell that you have been a teacher in your life. I mean, and you
mm,
indeed have taught English, and I can tell that. And I have heard, and I know this to be true, is that you don't really know anything until you can teach it. And the best way to learn something is to try to teach it. And so delivering a summary or, putting it back out in your own words, that's really good. And you're good at it. So
well, thank you, I appreciate it. I'm glad all the repetitions pay off, and that's that's what anyone should. That's the takeaway that people should know is like the more you do it, the better you get at it, and that
yeah,
that just takes care of itself. So you just got to be willing to get started, and put yourself out there, and you never know what's going to happen.
that's right. That's right. Because now is the time when we need to multiply the output. The input is it's winding down, okay? Just in terms of the quality that you can get. So the output is what's called for right now, in my opinion.
Mm.
So next week I am going to be talking with Neil Foster because it will be the second Thursday of the month, and that's the way. I'm doing it. And then there are, kind of a backlog of things I've thought about doing or have had cancellations and need to reschedule. So that'll be upcoming too. It is always a delight to speak with you, Nick. And I look forward to next month and covering Perelandra. So
Yes, I can't wait
thank
to
you.
dive back into the universe of random and random ransom.
Random,
You can tell it's
random
late
ransom,
now.
eh?
Random ransom. But yeah, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
It is so much fun. And I will see you soon and see you in book club too, or hear you in book club because we don't actually do any video images there, but that's been a lot of fun too. So, all right, everyone, take care and thank you.